Hi again everyone, my name's Steve and this is Little Plastic People, and in today's video we're going to be taking another look at sculpting in SketchUp, but I'd like to do something a bit different. I'd like to slow it down and take a bit more time and go into some more detail, rather than speed running through like I've done in the last few videos. And honestly, this is because a lot of the 3D sculpting videos that I've done recently haven't done as well as the painting ones, and this, if anything, is an attempt to bump up those numbers. So, let's get to the video! So, I've been working on some infantry for my knight army, as I really like the idea of running some house guard or some footmen alongside those big stompy robots. I'm planning to run them as voidsmen and inquisitorial henchmen, as they're the most efficient allied options that I can see right now. The voidsmen are pretty much done, as are most of the henchmen, and a couple of assassins. But I need a gun servitor, as I don't really have anything else that will stand in for it. After a quick rummage around in the pile of shame, pile of opportunity, I stumbled across UR25 from the Blackstone Fortress box set. This is a great mini, and I've been waiting a while to find a really good reason to paint him up, but he doesn't look quite right. So I've swapped out his gun barrel with one from an Armiger's carapace stubber, and sculpted a more servitor looking vice-like claw. This kind of thing is exactly what I feel 3D printing excels at in the mini hobby. With a little bit of patience and practice, you can make your own custom conversion parts, making your minis look exactly how you want them to look, and giving them some interesting individuality. So to make this deceivingly simple part, I first draw out a copy of the contact area it will be attaching to. Measuring the arm of UR25 carefully with a set of calipers helps make sure everything will fit and give us a scale to draw from. Next we can start thinking about blocking in the basic shapes, which will give us the main body of the piece. Now this is where taking a look at some reference material will really help solidify your ideas. This doesn't have to be specifically servitors. In this case, industrial equipment and plant machinery were drawn upon quite a bit. Next up, I offset the contact plate edges and extrude up by about 0.7 of a millimeter. Knowing what your printer can resolve along with the distances, recesses and details, which work at 28mm scale, is really important here, as too thin or shallow cuts won't print well or won't end up being defined and can easily be obscured with a layer or two of paint. A starting rule of thumb that I find helpful is to make sure that the most narrow gap or cut isn't any smaller than 0.3 of a millimeter across, with things like rivets or studs being around 0.65 of a millimeter in diameter. But knowing what will look good, or good enough, comes with practice and a little trial and error. Next up, I block in the area in which I think the clamp jaws are going to sit, before extruding each individual clamp. At this point, I utilise one of SketchUp's greatest features, components. A component is essentially a cloned instance of any given object, which retains a connection to the original, so any change made to one is made in the same way to the other. This is great for any project that will have copies of the same item, as it saves on having to edit each one individually. Here I even mirror the copy, so I can just work on one rather than the pair. With the basic clamps in place, I use the circle tool to create a hub of sorts, sizing and positioning it with the clamps until I'm happy, ensuring there are an appropriate amount of edges to it, so that they can't be seen when printed. My rule of thumb here is 20 sides for small things less than a millimeter or two, 50 sides for larger things up to around 4 or 5 millimeters, and 100 sides or more for anything larger. The reason for not just going ham with 100 or more sides for everything is that the more geometry you have in a model, the larger the file and the slower the software is at handling it. Not so much of an issue with small parts like this, but can be something to consider in larger projects. Next, I revisit the clamp jaws using a plugin called Round Corner to fillet the edges. Plugins are another SketchUp strength. They're additional third-party tools which are often designed to do something very specific. Many are free, and even the paid ones are more often than not very reasonable considering the amount of use that you can get out of them. After a little adjustment, I use the rectangular drawing tool to extrude out a basic tooth. Again using the Round Corner plugin to fillet the edges, resizing a little, making a component and copying it down the jaw. Going back to the hub, I offset the edge and extrude out a little detail before copying it to the opposite side. You could also use a mirrored component here, which would save a little time. After a review and some minor adjustments, it's back to the jaws for some detailing. Remembering that this piece is going to be quite small, so not overdoing it. A couple of studs extruded from a basic circle with rounded corners does the job for now. Back to the hub again, and I want to do something similar, adding studs around the circumference. But there isn't enough space. So, offsetting again, I remove some of the inner ring to leave more space for the studs, which I copy around the hub, spacing them evenly with the rotate tool, before copying them once again to the opposite side. Now we have something very basic that kind of looks like what we're looking for, but it is very basic. So I make a copy and leave it to the side, leaving the original just in case we want to go back to it. To make the jaws look like they could actually work, I decide to add in a runner connecting them both. Imagining this is what provides the claw with its pretty literal vice-like grip. So using the rectangle tool and the extrude tool, I run a bar through the jaws and out the side of each by some distance, adding caps to each end in the same way, checking periodically that each piece is watertight. This is particularly important when it comes to printing, as any holes can cause errors and failed prints. Now to add some detail to the bar with some grooves and teeth. I first offset and cut out the bar's centre, before making a tooth in the same way as we did with the jaws, this time copying them without a gap along the full length of the bar's centre, using the resizing tool to make up the difference. It's starting to look a little more believable now, and after another review I add in a section of cylinder connecting the bar to the hub, filleting the end to add a little interest. And just to separate this from the jaws a bit, I offset and cut away a thin boundary between the two, in hopes that once painted, this will help a wash add a little definition. But taking a step back, I decided to lower the jaws towards the connection plate, which obscures this anyway. But it's the thought that counts, huh? It's looking okay, but I still think we can make it look a little more believable. So I decide to add in some visible cogs to the mechanism. Using the circle tool, I select 12 edges, the holy number of the Mechanicus, before using this as a guide to create a 12-toothed cog. I end up making each tooth a component like before and array it evenly, before extruding the center hub, moving it into its rough position and resizing it to suit. To increase the level of detail, an extension to the hub is added before copying it to the other side, which in turn populates the mirrored component. At this point, it looks as though the cog is part of the jaw housing, so a thin groove is cut around it just to add a little separation and definition. Hopefully I don't end up covering this up like before. Feeling like we're almost there, I still want to add more detail, so I round off the corners of the plates at each end of the toothed bar using the previous plugin, before making some small adjustments to the teeth in the jaws and adding an extra stud. More separation is added between the bar and the jaws for the same reason as previous, before I go back and adjust the size and position of a few other parts. But still feeling like it just needs a little more, I use the circle tool again, selecting 6 sides, extruding a nut and a bolt for each end of the bar, recessing them both for added interest and texture, without going over the top with the detail. And after a few final adjustments, that's about it. The part is exported as an STL, supported, scaled and sliced in Lychee Slicer before being printed. Now Lychee Slicer is a piece of software that cuts up the files into a format that the 3D printer can understand. I won't go into details about it here, but I did make a few copies in the slicer, each at slightly different scales. Once printed, this gives you options, meaning you can offer them up to the actual Mini and pick the size you prefer, without having to adjust and reprint if it's just a little off in scale. If you're looking for more information on where to start with 3D printing, I'd highly recommend checking the videos made by Ross over at Fauxhammer, as his videos explaining the fundamentals of resin printing specifically for mini wargaming are the best about and far better explained than I'm capable of. So after a quick print, here we are. UR25 has an extra grippy hand, and although he's not as tall as the rest, I think he'll look great marching alongside some bigger stompy robots. As always, I hope this has been helpful, and hopefully not too dry. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. Does 3D printing in the mini hobby space interest you? Do you think you'll have a go at making your own digital parts for 3D printing? Or do you already? Is this kind of video something that you'd like to see more of? The numbers are saying no. Stick to painting videos. But creating custom parts is such an integral part of my hobby that I really enjoy sharing. So I'd love to make more videos like this, or find a more engaging way to share it. Maybe I just need to shoehorn them into a few more painting videos. Anyways, thanks for sticking around and watching. Like, follow, share, and all that good stuff. But until next time, bye!